On February 19th, 1942, following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, allowing for the relocation of Japanese Americans and Japanese American citizens from the areas that they were legally off limits to. The order allowed the U.S. government to reallocate all the Japanese aliens and citizens among 26 states located in 7 western states that included Washington, Idaho, AZ, and the order authorized the Secretary of War to prescribe the military aliens as a matter of national security.
Fred Korematsu was a Japanese American living in California. Following the Executive Order 9066, which ordered the relocation of all Japanese American citizens, he chose to say, he changed his appearance, name, and ethnicity in order to avoid going to camp, but on May 30th, 1942, Korematsu was arrested in order to relocate.
The legal issue presented in this case is whether or not the Executive Order 9066 is constitutionally justified and if Korematsu had violated said order. This issue is initially addressed in the lower district courts of Northern California and again in the Ninth Circuit Courts of Appeals in the year 1944. The issue was taken to the United States Supreme Court later that same year. Another legal issue addressed is whether or not this order was an attempt at the legalization of racism, and if it had violated the 14th Amendment and the human rights of Fred Korematsu. This issue had been addressed by the Supreme Court some 40 years later with a reevaluation of the preliminary issue and the holdings cited in the year 1983.
Violating the order in a lower court, and the Court of Appeals affirmed this decision. The Supreme Court affirmed the decision in a 6-3 vote. The court ruled that it was a military necessity and not a race-based issue. That the dissenting opinion made by Jackson argues and the Supreme Court held the internment of Americans of Japanese descent during the war was constitutional. However, the lower court's holdings were later overturned 40 years when the case was reopened, showing that the new evidence that the United States government officials had destroyed evidence that the government intelligence agencies found that the Japanese Americans proved no threat to them. It was concluded by Justice Robert Jackson that the order was a violation of the 14th Amendment and Korematsu's name was cleared.
While in prison, Korematsu allowed the American Civil Liberties Union to represent him to attest to the orders of Order 9066. The ACLU wanted to challenge the constitutionality of the government order. Korematsu was convicted of violating military orders and sentenced to 5 years of probation and sent to an assembly center in California. On December 18, 1944, the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision that the detention of these citizens was not based on race and was a military need. In 1983, the case was reopened by a legal team, and evidence that the government's legal team had suppressed or destroyed evidence on reports that showed that Japanese Americans posed no threat to the military or the United States was found.